Here's our career Sherpa, Julie Bauke.
Yes, she is here from the Bauke Group. That's Bauke. She's a job and career coach, the bestest in Cincinnati. Jules, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Well, I couldn't be better. How about you?
I'm doing fine. I look with great interest in Joe Biden, of course, 2020 presidential hopeful for the Democrat Party. And Joe Biden is, I don't know, I look at this and go, all right, I don't see it. He's a guy from a different generation. He's a grandfatherly, touchy-feely kind of guy. Got more problems with his policies than I do how he conducts himself. But he is too handsy to be president. Does this relate to the working world in that are there employers who may be a bit too handsy? And what's the lesson here?
Well, you know, it's what's hard is it's really there are people who are just touchy in general.
Yeah.
There are people who are touchy with intent to take it further, and it can be hard to distinguish or describe between the two. I've had people I've worked with that have, come up behind me, put their hands on my shoulders, and I knew that was just their style, and it wasn't offensive, and it didn't creep me out.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had other people come up and they whisper in your ear, and it's almost like a nuzzle, and it's just disgusting. And it's almost like the recipient of it gets to decide what's okay. So therefore, what I would tell any guy in the workplace, is keep your hands to yourself. It's probably the safest way to go. I mean, do you really need to be touching people other than shaking hands?
Mm-hmm. I get it.
If you really want to stay out of trouble, really, keep your hands to yourself or ask yourself. Also, another thing would be to say, I'm doing this to this woman I work with. Would I do this to a man? And if you wouldn't, then it's inappropriate.
Yeah. Well, according to the stories, there's plenty of video out there that he does this to generally women, but he also does it to men too, because he's the kind of guy who wants to make a human connection. And so there's never been any allegations, as far as I know, towards sexual misconduct or anything else. But one of my favorite all-time pictures, and was actually on my Facebook page for a while, was I think it was in the 2012 election when Joe Biden was in a giant diner and he's nuzzled up to this woman who's a biker, and her biker boyfriend or husband is looking at Joe Biden like, if the Secret Service weren't here, I'd kill this guy right now. It's one of my favorite pictures of all time. But that's what you're doing. He's not. I don't think he's doing anything sexual, anything wrong.
No, I don't
certainly
either.
Republicans want to make that to be the case. I don't. But we live in a day and age where you can't do that anymore. And I know people in business who used to be that kind of guy. I wonder where they are today, though.
Yeah, the issue is that it really is incumbent upon. I believe it's okay to say if you don't want to be touched and someone touches you in other ways than just shaking hands, or you're at a funeral or a wedding and there's a hug exchange, but to say, that makes me uncomfortable, please don't touch me. There's nothing wrong with saying that. And I think about my kids had an elementary school teacher who didn't like to be touched, and everybody knew it, and she would tell you that. It didn't make people like her less. It's just they understood her boundaries. And so as women, we have to get comfortable speaking up and saying, that makes me uncomfortable, please don't touch me.
Yeah, I just make the, could you do? I was like, oh, I'm sorry. And, but
right.
That's funny. I used to work with a woman, and she was someone who hugged everybody. I mean, if you first met her, she'd hug you. It was that was kind of weird, too.
Well, yeah, and so I've had people say, I'll meet people for the first time, and I'll put my hand out, and they'll go, I'm a hugger. I think that's risky. I think because it puts you in the position of saying, well, I'm not, and stiff-arming them. So I think people who are naturally very touchy or naturally huggers need to take a step back, too, and say, you've got to look for those clues. So if I go in for the hug and people are obviously keeping their arms to their sides, don't do that.
Right.
And so I think there's just needs to be some awareness on both sides. But I also, I also get really frustrated with people who don't like something, and they tell everybody but the person who's doing it. If I was doing something, right?
Yeah.
If I was doing something people didn't like, I'd want to know.
Well, it's like this Lucy Flores. She was the one who was a Bernie supporter, and she 2 years after she was hugged by Joe Biden, all of a sudden now has a problem with it. I look at that and go, okay, say something to the person, be confrontational, or back up, go, hey, nothing personal, I'm not a big hugger.
Yeah.
What's wrong with telling somebody no?
Yeah, exactly. There's nothing wrong with it. And I think that's what happens in the workplace is if someone comes up and, says or does something inappropriate and you say, please don't do that, I don't think that's appropriate, and they keep doing it. Right. That's where it becomes a problem.
How do you read
happening,
Yeah, how do you read that situation, Julie? Like somebody's coming in for the hug, maybe an acquaintance, a friend, someone that you work with, and how do you know like the person's receptive to a hug? And once you do the hug thing, you always got to do the hug because you can't not hug after you hug. Well, first time, every time you see them, then you got to hug. You're committed to the hug after this, Julie.
I have a problem with when you first meet somebody hugging them. In general, unless you've known each other in other ways online or on the phone, like you're or you're a good friend of a friend, or it's a funeral. But I've definitely gone to hug people before, people that I know, and they'll give you the half hug, like the arm around the shoulders hug. It's like, okay, now I know.
Like the bro hug, the bro hug kind of thing. It's like,
Yeah,
I don't know. It's like if I see you, Julie, I come up to, if I go in for the hug and you stick the hand out, that's kind of awkward. Now you're leaving me hanging. I don't know what to do anymore.
Well, what if I knee you in the groin? How would that be?
What do you hit somebody who's like, well, I hope you don't mind, I'm a hugger. I hope you don't mind, I'm a vomiter.
Yeah.
That generally scares people away.
hope you don't mind, I like to grab butts.
I like to throw. I occasionally vomit on people, just so you know. All right, just something to know, because I'm sure that still happens at work.
You got to have, both sides. And it's so frustrating in the workplace when there's this passive-aggressive behavior and people aren't willing to say, you know what, I would appreciate if you'd let me finish my thought instead of interrupting me. What's wrong with that? I mean, don't you want to know how people want to be treated? This whole treat me like, the golden rule, treat people like you want to be treated, isn't necessarily, if you're a hugger, not everybody wants to be hugged. And so you have to, just socially, you have to be aware and professionally what people's cues are. And look for patterns. I mean, Joe Biden, I absolutely believe there's no sexual intent. I think he's just a overly touchy grandpa.
Yeah, that's what I think.
But at the same time, the people on the receiving end of that they get to say, too, what's okay with them. That doesn't mean we have to give in because that's what he does. That's just Joe. But I do think there's, a little bit of that. Like you said, she's a Bernie supporter, so let's just start throwing firebombs here.
Right. Well, I don't think, Julie, I don't think it's like there's nothing sexual, but still, it doesn't mean it's not creepy, though. He's kissing people, keep kissing people's hair. I don't know, what's with the hair kissing?
Yeah, or I had this guy one time, he was a husband of somebody I worked with, would come up behind me, move my hair out of the way and kiss me on the neck, and was like,
what?
Oh my God.
No.
Yeah, oh yeah. He was like, her husband, you
weird.
are the creepiest person
that's
I know.
Creepy.
Yeah.
That's
everybody experienced that with him. And so a well-placed, wow, that was inappropriate.
Headbutt.
Or please don't do that again. It might get you she's very touchy and sensitive, but who cares? We have to, and I think a lot of times as women, we aren't raised to step up and to speak up for ourselves. And instead we're just like, meh, behind the scenes. And I think that's just really, really dangerous.
Or you'll put it out on social media, right? One of those things. Julie Bauke is our career Sherpa on the Scott Sloan Show, 700 WLW at thebaukegroup.com. She's a career coach. Something else, too, you pointed out to me that almost a quarter of American workers say that they have used drugs or alcohol on the job. And by the way, that does not include holiday parties, birthday parties, retirement parties, incentive parties, celebrations, nothing like that. As people just start drinking and using drugs on the job, that's incredible.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, what was something is further in this article, it talked about the industries in which that is most prevalent. Healthcare was one of the biggest. So you've got people working in healthcare settings who are using drugs and alcohol on the job. Now, not surprisingly, hospitality, like bars and restaurants, was high. I think that's different, but the healthcare thing surprised me. 23%. I mean, this is not the Mad Men days where people went out for a 2-martini lunch, but for some people, I guess it still is.
Yeah, I can barely do my job sober. If you listen to the show for any length of period, it's like, man, he can barely keep it together when he's got coffee and water in him, let alone a beer or some whiskey or something like that. And yet there's some people I know that can function totally fine doing that. I just want to either continue or take a nap.
Yeah, so if you think about it, though, it makes sense. I mean, sometimes we think about work as like this place where things are different, but they really aren't. I mean, 23.5 million Americans are addicted to drugs or alcohol, and then another 22 million are in recovery. Those people have jobs. A lot of them have jobs. Mm-hmm. And just of the people who regularly use drugs and alcohol, chances are they're not going to stop for the 9 hours, during the day.
Right.
and maybe they got a flask in the car on the way home. They're generally not, if they're addicted, they're not going to be able to stop during that period of time. And we've all known people who are quote unquote functional alcoholics or drug addicts. Eventually, it catches up with you. Either you harm yourself or someone else, and there's definitely a loss of productivity. Right. That goes along with that.
Well, what if you can do your job while you're drunk? What if you can have a couple of beers while you're working and you're extremely productive? What about that, Julie?
I think that collectively that's going to catch up with you because, really is if you have to have, okay. So we all work, we all have this 24/7 thing, where we're especially, depending on your job, you're on call or, you might get an email from the boss. And you might have had a beer or two. You might have had a glass of wine or two. Right. And so, for sure, we've all responded to texts or emails after we've had a drink. Almost anybody who drinks at all has probably responded to emails after they've had a glass of wine.
I get really salty when I start doing that.
Yeah,
I was told by my bosses not to respond to angry listeners when I'm drunk.
That's right. Exactly. There you go. You'd probably say things you wouldn't when you were sober.
No, I say the exact same things I do. That's the scary part.
That's the problem.
There's no
we probably think we're not impaired, but I think if we go back maybe sometimes and look at our performance or look at how we responded to something, it wasn't our best moment, and it's tough, because think about it. With all the drug and alcohol addiction, people in treatment, the healthcare costs are going up. And employers are shouldering a big percentage of that. So it's an ongoing crisis, not only in healthcare costs, but also in performance on the job.
How much back in the day you think, though? Because, 23% of American workers say they've used drugs or drank while on the job, not including parties. Does that include like your 3-martini lunch or anything like that? I don't know. But how much worse was it back in the day? It had to be far worse, right?
Yeah. I don't know if that was... That'd be interesting to know. I don't know if that was an era where it was just executive level people or, higher level manager people, or if it was everybody. Remember smoking? Smoking in the office. Yep. That's very much in our recent memory. Mm-hmm. Smoking on elevators, smoking in the conference room, smoking on airplanes.
What about Mad Men? Mad Men was pretty symbolic of the era, right? Everyone's got. I thought it was kind of cool that you could have like a, and it's never a bottle. It's like you got to have a decanter. See, if you're drinking, if you have the bottle sitting on your desk, you're a degenerate. But if you have it in a nice crystal decanter, that's acceptable, Julie. It's how you drink.
You tell people that's for your guests. That's not for me. So.
You get the decanter, you're not a degenerate at all. Not a degenerate.
What about the bottle in your desk drawer?
Yeah, but if it's a decanter, not in your desk drawer, then that's class.
Crystal.
Yeah, like a crystal. It's got that heavy crystal cap, and then they drink it. No one has ice. They drink everything neat. But that's high class. That's not a degenerate.
That's true. That this study does not include those people because that's clearly okay.
Yes,
especially
absolutely
when you're going up and
fine.
nuzzling somebody's neck. Nuzzle somebody's neck with a drink in your hand. You got it.
No, it's just we are a really, really caring workplace here. That's all it is. That's all it is.
I know. I've been there.
So no showing up drunk to work. I still contend. I think that there are people that can do their job just fine with a couple beers.
Well, those are high-functioning alcoholics. I think that generally catches up with you.
I don't know. There's some in today in the era also, Julie, because let's face it, employees are more in demand. There's too many jobs and not enough workers that I think some employers look the other way with this kind of stuff. Maybe in some cases encourage it. I was at a workplace where they had literally had cases of beer in the fridge.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Or they have happy hour on Friday in the office. There's this myth that millennials really want that. Maybe some do.
I think they do.
Yeah, that starts to get, again, that's a slippery slope. Somebody has, from an employer standpoint, if you think from a liability standpoint, employer provides beer in the refrigerator. Somebody has 2 or 3 beers, goes home and gets in an accident on their way home, and they got the beer at work. That's a risk that apparently some employers are willing to take. But I think it's a high. It's just the cost of providing beer at work is potentially very high. You can play the odds, but you can
also get people to show up to work all of a sudden now, right?
Yeah, you could. Yeah.
I think the other equation here too, Julie, is when did we cross the line from blurring the line between leisure and home and having a life and work, right? Because back in the day, you come home, you punch your clock, you go to work, you do your job, and then you go out and hang out with your buddies. You'd have family life, right? And now, and here's a story too out of California where they're proposing, I was just talking about this the other day, Bauke, is that they are proposing, and this is at the state level, but the goal is in 2 years is to make it the law in California that between the ages of 6 weeks and 6 months, you would be allowed by law to bring your kid to work with you every day.
Oh,
isn't that blurring the line between?
That's crazy.
Between work and home,
I'm not in support of that.
No, not at all. It's but that's where we are. We've got all these things to make it feel like, hey, it's camaraderie. It's this is where you want to spend all your time. And I think you get more work out of people too because they tend to want to hang around because that's where the free beer and no childcare is.
Well, yeah. I mean, we got to look at what other countries do. We have to make quality childcare more affordable. Period. And that's probably what this law is trying to address. But I think they're going about it the wrong way. I don't care. It's not the place to have your baby at work. I mean, there are workplaces in which it could work. I mean, there are workplaces where they have daycare on site. Mm-hmm. There are places where if you've got a small company and you let a few people bring their babies to work if their child care falls through. But I don't know. I think that is a slippery slope. And frankly, what about the people who don't want to do conference calls with crying babies in the background? What about, to say that, you're sitting at your desk breastfeeding, I do think that, there's nothing wrong with breastfeeding, but I do think that line has gotten blurred, and technology has made that happen.
Yeah.
Technology has enabled that because we're expected to work 24/7. So therefore, why shouldn't you be able to be a mom 24/7 and bring your baby to work?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's good. Some occupations scream, like, for example, chainsaw factory, slaughterhouses, good places to bring your kid to work. The brass ass. Now, with the brass ass, does it count if the baby is not yet come to term?
Good question. Good question.
Is that technically bringing your kid to work if the kid is still in utero? I don't know. Anyway, something to discuss with Julie Bauke, our Career Sherpa this morning on the Scott Sloan Show.
Before next week.
You figure this one out. BaukeGroup.com if you're looking for some career advice. She's the woman. Thanks so much, Julie.
Hey, bud.
And I'm giving you audio hugs right now.